The desert wind carried whispers that night of a woman in white, barefoot and breathless, standing at the edge of nowhere. Her dress was torn at the hem, her eyes as hollow as the moon above, and her name, well, no one ever knew it. All anyone remembered was how the stranger rode into town with her slumped behind him, her hands gripping his coat like it was the only solid thing left in a world that had crumbled. They said he never spoke a word, just looked once at the sheriff, then at the sky, and rode straight to his ranch with her like she'd always belonged there, like the land itself had whispered her into being. But that was the end of the story. The real question is, who was she? Before that dust-covered dawn? Why didn't she speak? And what did the cowboy see in her that made him break every rule he'd ever lived by? He didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. She was his storm before the calm, and he was her silence, finally understood. Subscribe now, because tomorrow's story will haunt you even deeper. You'll need it. But before that, let me take you to the day it all began. The town of Dust Bell was the kind of place where secrets didn't stay secrets for long. It had only one church, one general store, and too many eyes watching from behind lace curtains. The land stretched endlessly around it, flat, scorched, and unkind, broken only by cattle fences and the wind-chiseled bones of what used to be. She came walking in from the east road just after dawn, where the sky still held onto the night like a bruise. No luggage, no shoes. Just a faded brown satchel slung over her shoulder and a dress too thin for the cold. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but not frightened. Not anymore. Fear had long since left her. What she wore now was emptiness, the kind that sits deep, in the bones. No one asked her name. They just watched. She settled by the abandoned train depot at the edge of town, where weeds grew up through the tracks, and no trains had passed in over a decade. She made herself a place out of old canvas and broken crates. Some said she'd sleep under the stars like she preferred it. Others whispered she had nowhere else to go. She was a shadow in their periphery. Not a beggar, not a drifter, not quite sane, they said. But no one could look her in the eyes without flinching, because one eye was gray, the other pale and blind. They said it came from a fire, a barn blaze or a lightning strike. No one knew. The stories changed weekly. She never corrected them. Some thought she was mute. Others swore they'd heard her singing once, soft and broken under her breath. But the sound of it made them uneasy. It was too sad to bear. The children were told not to go near her. Mrs. Granger, who ran the bakery, claimed she saw a scar running from the woman's collarbone to the base of her throat when the wind caught her dress just right. Clean as a blade, she'd whisper, like she'd witnessed something holy, or something cursed. The preacher called her a soul in penance, said God brings such people to towns like Dust Bell for a reason, though he never quite said what that reason was. By the time autumn came, the whispers outnumbered the facts. What they did know was this: she never spoke, not even when spoken to. She limped when she walked, just slightly, like one foot dragged through a memory the other didn't want to recall. She never came into the church. She never visited the saloon. She never caused trouble. But she never fit in. They called her the Wind Woman behind closed doors, like she belonged more to the air than to the earth. Once Miss Clara, the seamstress, tried to give her a blanket. The woman took it in her arms, looked Clara dead in the eyes, and tried to return it the next morning. That was the only time anyone saw her cry. They didn't see her tears, just the wet fabric she handed back without a word. From then on, they stopped trying. Dust Bell didn't hate her, not exactly. It just didn't know what to do with her. The town had no room for half-stories, no patience for the slow healing of invisible wounds, and she was nothing but half-stories and silence. Once a month, she'd take odd jobs from the outskirts, fixing fences, cleaning stables, patching clothes, for ranch hands who didn't ask questions. Her hands were rough and calloused, her back scarred from labor, not pity. She lived in the in-between, not quite lost, not quite found. No one saw her smile, no one knew if she could. And still, she walked with dignity, chin high, eyes forward, even if one couldn't see. Sometimes, in the fading light of evening, she'd stand by the split-rail fence near the depot and watch the horizon like it might return something it once took from her. A husband, a child, a home. People speculated, of course. A widow, most said. Fled from abuse, others whispered. Some even believed she was running from the law, but the truth was simpler and heavier. She had no name. Not anymore. Not after the night her papers burned along with everything she used to be. Not after the man who gave her his last name vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but debts and bruises that couldn't be seen. And when the town she tried to build a life in turned its back on her, she wandered until Dustbell appeared. Like an accident or a test, here no one called her a liar. No one remembered her husband's debts. No one looked at her like she was broken glass someone else had to sweep up. Here, she was nothing. And in that nothingness, there was at least peace. But peace can feel like loneliness when you wear it too. Long she didn't cry anymore, not out loud. Instead, she walked, she worked, she existed. And the only time something like life returned to her face was when the horses came through, the wild ones, the broken ones, the ones too stubborn to tame. She'd watch them like she understood something no one else did. Maybe she did. Maybe the untamable recognized their own. One morning, as she mucked out the barn behind the Hartley farm, a storm kicked up from the west. Not a storm of rain, but of hooves, dust, thunder, and at the center of it, him, the cowboy. He was a stranger to most, but not to legend. Some said he owned half the land between Dustbell and Crossbone Ridge. Others said he had more money than the bank, more silence than the graveyard. They called him cold, efficient, brutal in business, and alone by choice. And yet, when his eyes met hers that day through the drifting dust, something shifted. Not in the wind, not in the land, but in her. For the first time, someone saw her and did not flinch. He didn't ask her who she was. He didn't ask where she came from. He simply dismounted, stood beside her in silence, and handed her a canteen. She took it, drank, and for the first time in years, her hands trembled. He said only one thing before he left. "You don't belong to this dust." And just like that, he rode off, not realizing he'd already claimed her, not realizing she'd follow him, not with words or will, but with the silent ache of someone who had finally been seen. The second time he came, it wasn't on horseback. It was a Sunday morning when the sun was kind and the town square hummed with its usual rhythm. Church bells rang, and Dustbell's faithful filed into pews with polished boots and bowed heads. She sat by the depot, legs tucked beneath her, sewing a tear in her only coat. A stray dog curled beside her feet. Her hair was loose, threaded with dust and wind. That's when she noticed the boots. Polished leather. Not dusty like a ranch hand's, but not soft like a townsman's either. They stopped a few paces from her. She didn't look up right away, just finished her stitch with careful hands. When she did, he was already watching. The cowboy. The one who didn't ask. He wore the same weather-worn hat, the same dark eyes that read people like letters never meant to be opened. He was older than most men who still rode the range, but not by much. There was silver at his temples, and something in his jaw that said he'd never asked permission for anything in his life. He held a brown paper parcel in one hand. She blinked. He set it beside her without a word, nodded once, turned. That was it. She didn't open the parcel until after he disappeared down the road. Inside, a thick wool shawl the color of sand, and a small jar of honey. Nothing extravagant, just warm, thoughtful. It was the first gift she'd received in years. She didn't know what to do with it. By the third visit, he sat beside her. No fanfare, no questions. Just sat, his long legs outstretched, his hat shading half his face from the eye. Sun. They watched the town together in silence. The way the dust curled down Main Street. The way folks glanced at them, then quickly away. He didn't seem to care. She did, but only a little. The next time he spoke, it was a question. Not the kind that pressed. but the kind that waited patiently for an answer it might never get. "Do you miss wherever you came from?" She didn't answer. Not aloud. But her breath caught, just enough for him to notice. He nodded slowly, as if that breath was enough. "I don't miss anything," he said. "Not anymore." Still, she said nothing, but something in her softened. Over the weeks, he came, more often, never with demands, never with expectation. Sometimes he brought things, books with torn covers, hand-stitched gloves, a mug with a chipped handle. Once, a harmonica, though neither of them played. She took it with a smile so faint, he almost missed it, and still, they rarely spoke. Their silences became ritual. She watched the way he watched the land, as if it answered him more clearly than people ever could. He noticed the way she moved, her slight limp, the way her left hand trembled on colder days, how she flinched, only when someone raised their voice nearby. Once, a drunken rancher stumbled too close to her fire one night, shouting about lost cattle and how strays always eat more than they're worth. The cowboy stepped between them with the ease of someone used to settling storms before they started. No words, no fists, just a look. The drunk left, muttering into the dark. She looked at him then, not as the silent man who brought gifts and sat in her shade, but as something steadier, like fence posts driven deep into the earth, like a place she could lean. But Dustbell didn't change easily. Whispers stirred again, sharper this time. Why's he always near her? She's got something on him, maybe. A woman like that don't get close to a man like him without reason. Mrs. Granger, who once pitied her, now eyed her with suspicion when she passed the bakery. The preacher's sermon suddenly leaned into parables about temptation, and outsiders, and wolves wearing the faces of lambs. She said nothing, as always, but the town's warmth, what little she'd earned, cooled. Even Clara, the seamstress, who used to nod at her in passing, now turned away at the market well. And the cowboy, he noticed. "You're colder now than the wind," he said one dusk as they watched the sun bury itself behind the hills. Dustbell's got long memories and short forgiveness. She looked down at her hands. He reached into his coat, pulling something from the inside pocket. It was a photograph, old, faded, a woman and a boy, standing in front of a ranch gate, both laughing. "My sister and her son," he said quietly. "They passed 2 winters ago." Fever took him. Grief took her. She looked at him, startled by the honesty, by the rawness. "I told myself I'd never let anyone close again. Not enough to lose." He looked up, met her gaze. "But you ain't close. You're just there. And somehow that's worse." She blinked, unsure if it was a compliment or a warning. He shrugged. "You've made a ghost of yourself. But I see you." A long pause. Wind rustling through dying leaves. "And I think you see me too." For a long while she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, for the first time in weeks, she whispered something so soft it barely stirred the air. "Why?" He turned toward her. "Why what?" "Why, help me?" He studied her, then simply said, "Because no one helped me." She looked away, emotion thick in her throat. That answer, quiet, unadorned, spoke to a place in her deeper than scars or stories. But the danger wasn't always in fists or words. Sometimes it was in proximity. And now the town watched them like a wound. Trouble didn't come as a storm. It came as a letter, slipped under the door of the sheriff's office one morning. "No, no signature, just one line. She doesn't belong here, and neither does he if he keeps trying to make her stay." The sheriff, a fair man with more gray than black in his hair, folded it carefully, lit a match, and burned it. He didn't believe in ghosts or warnings, but he had seen what happened to those who lived outside the rules of Dustbell. So he made his way to the ranch that evening, found the cowboy sitting on his porch, a cigarette smoldering between his fingers. "Tread carefully," the sheriff said. The cowboy nodded. "Always do," but his eyes were already on the eastern ridge, where her silhouette stood against the last light of the day, shawl wrapped tight, hair dancing like fire. The wind was shifting, and with it, everything else. Winter arrived early that year, like a secret unraveling too soon. The first frost came before the harvest was in, curling the leaves and silencing the birds. Dust Bell turned inward, windows shuttered, doors bolted against the cold, and the things no one dared name. She kept to herself even more now. Even the cowboy came less often, though never too far. He always left signs, an apple in a folded napkin, a clean blanket draped over the old crate she used as a seat. Quiet offerings, quiet care, but whispers carry farther in cold air, and someone had grown tired of silence. It happened on market day. She came into town for flour, wrapped in her sand-colored shawl, hood up against the wind. She didn't look for kindness anymore, just passage, just space enough to breathe and leave. But that morning, a group of townsfolk had gathered outside the general store. Clara was among them, her arms crossed, her expression too tight to be called kindness. She's been living off scraps long. Enough, someone muttered. Can't even speak for herself. How do we know what she's hiding? She's got him fooled, that's all. Then came the voice that cut deepest. She's not a woman. She's a curse. And Clara, sweet, sad Clara, stepped forward, holding a paper in her hand. A letter, stained and creased. One that had arrived from another town days ago. It bore a name. A different one. A name the woman hadn't spoken in years. Her real name. A name she had buried with her past. You lied, Clara said. You said you had no name. The crowd turned, not in anger but in cold judgment. The woman's breath froze in her chest. Her hands trembled. She didn't know who sent the letter. She only knew what it meant. That her past had caught up. That someone had gone looking. They knew now. That she had once been married, that she had once run, that her husband had disappeared, debts behind him, accusations left in her shadow, that she had tried to rebuild and failed. Shame burned hotter than any fire, and still she didn't speak. Couldn't, not with so many eyes, not with the weight of 1,000 silent accusations pressing down like snow. So she turned and walked away. No one stopped her. Not even Clara. She left behind the flour, the shawl, the safety of the town's edges, and, when night fell, so did the storm. The wind howled across the open land like a mourning song. Snow came down fast and heavy, erasing roads, burying fences, silencing everything. She walked blindly, her coat too thin, her boots soaked through. Every step was a memory, every breath, a reckoning. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay. And somewhere between one moment and the next, her knees gave out. She collapsed in the snow near the old stone boundary line that marked the end of Dust Bell's known land. Her hands curled into the frost. Her breath came shallow, and for a moment, maybe more, she let go. Let the cold swallow her silence. Let the wind take what was left. He found her by instinct. The cowboy had risen before dawn with a knot in his chest and no peace in his bones. He rode toward the depot, but the canvas was gone, the fire cold, the dog missing. So he followed the snow. The trail was faint, nearly erased, but her steps were never hurried. Even now her stubborn limp left just enough. He found her by the stones nearly buried. No fanfare, no cries, just quiet. He dismounted, wrapped her in his coat and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Though the truth was, she carried the weight of too many yesterdays. Back at the ranch, he built a fire with more urgency than he showed. He laid her near the hearth, covered her in quilts, and sat beside her, silent as the grave. She woke slowly, her eyes fluttered, open, unfocused. But when she saw him, truly saw him, something inside cracked. I didn't lie, she whispered. Her voice was hoarse from cold and silence. I just didn't want to be her anymore. He didn't speak, just reached for. The kettle poured warm tea into a mug and held it out. She took it with shaking hands. He waited, then finally said, "Tell me, or don't. I'll still be here." Her eyes welled. "I loved him once," she began. "But he wasn't who I thought. When the debts came, He ran, left me with the ruin. And when the town blamed me, I ran, too. She looked down. I thought I could become no one, and no one would be safe. He nodded. You've never been no one to me. That broke something gentle and fierce in her chest. You don't owe me anything, she said. I'm not here to owe, he replied. I'm here to stay, if you'll let me. And then, for the first time since Dustbell had tried to bury her, she let herself cry. Not from weakness, but from being held up after all this time. She leaned against him, and he didn't fix her, didn't tell her it would be okay. He just stayed, warm, steady, real. Word spread, of course. Dustbell always watched. When spring returned, so did the whispers. But they no longer stung, because she no longer lived in the shadows. She returned to town one day, not hidden, not hurried, but arm in arm with the cowboy. He said little, she said less. But they didn't need to. They walked as if the world had already forgiven them, and maybe it had, or maybe it just didn't matter anymore. They thought she was broken. But someone saw gold in the ashes. The ranch didn't change overnight. It was no grand estate, just a few rolling acres pressed up against the hills, with a barn that leaned left and fences always in need of mending. But it was land. It was his. And now, it was theirs. They worked side by side. She, with sleeves, rolled and skirts tucked, sanding the porch rail, learning to hammer without flinching at the sound. He, quieter than ever, building more than fences, building something he'd never had the courage to want again. The days passed like slow prayers. One fence post, one firewood stack, one hot meal at a time. No grand declarations, just presence, just effort, and the townsfolk watched. Some turned their backs, some whispered behind their windows, but others started to nod. Clara left a pie on the fence post one morning. No note, just berries and apology baked into the crust. Even the preacher softened, mentioning grace more than guilt in his next sermon. Dustbell wasn't quick to change, but it did watch. And she began to look back, not over her shoulder, not for danger, but forward. One day she brought him a small tin can filled with seeds. I want to grow something, she said. He smiled, taking her hand. Then let's plant it. And they did. A small garden, a fresh fence, a stable with 3 rescued horses, a room with yellow curtains because she said it reminded her of the sky before rain. They didn't call it love, but it was. In the way a fire doesn't shout, but burns steadily. Then came the letter. This time, it was his name scrawled on the envelope. A red wax seal. Eastern postmark. He read it by the stove, jaw tight, fingers clenched. She watched from the doorway, her own heart catching the tone before he spoke a word. What is it? He didn't lie. My father passed, he said, left the land to me. She tilted her head. I thought this was your land. It is. This piece. But he owned hundreds more. Back east, real estate, banks, legacies. A pause. He never forgave me for leaving. She walked closer, slow. Why did you? His eyes met hers, full of old ghosts. Because I didn't want a life that cost me my soul. She touched the envelope. And now? He folded it, slid it into his coat. They want me to come back, run the empire, wear the name again. The fire cracked between them. For a moment, she thought she saw him leave, not in body, but in thought. In the way men disappear before they decide to go. She stepped closer. Do you want to go? I don't know. Another silence. Then quietly. Would you come with me? She flinched, not because of the question, but because the answer came too quickly. I can't, her voice barely above the wind. I've spent too long learning to live here, to live at all. I don't want to vanish again. He didn't argue, didn't. Beg just stood there, arms by his side, jaw set in something that wasn't anger, maybe grief, maybe decision. That night they didn't speak much, and in the morning, his horse was saddled. He didn't ride east. Not yet. Just into town, said. He had errands, but she knew the tension in his shoulders, the distance behind his eyes. She was losing him, but the land wasn't done with them. That afternoon, clouds gathered like secrets. A storm came fast, sudden, winds sharp as knives, thunder too close, lightning splitting the sky in angry seams. She ran to the barn, latching shutters, calling for the horses. Her hands trembled, the roof groaned, the garden bent sideways under rain, then the wind snapped the west fence like twigs. One horse bolted half-wild with panic into the open pasture. She followed, barefoot, coat whipping, shouting a name that wouldn't come. The storm was a deafening orchestra. But then, hooves. His horse. Him. Soaked to the bone, eyes scanning the field, he found her near the ridge, limping through mud, blood on her heel from a stone she'd stepped on. He dismounted, grabbed her hand. "You shouldn't be out here." "I had to," she gasped, half mad with wind. "They'd be alone. I know." They found the horse, calmed it, led it back together, hand in hand. Wordless. By the time the rain stopped, they were both shaking. Back in the barn, he wrapped her in a blanket. Then he finally said what had waited too long. "I didn't want to leave. I just thought, maybe I was meant for something bigger." She looked up at him. "You already have something bigger." He touched her cheek, mud still streaked beneath her jaw. "I almost forgot." Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the envelope. Soaked, torn, now unreadable. He tossed it into the fire. "They can keep their legacy." She blinked. "Are you sure?" He smiled, slow and steady. "I already claimed mine." The next spring, they built a new fence, painted it white. The yellow curtains stayed. The garden bloomed. They didn't marry right away. There was no need for paper when hearts already knew their place. But one morning, she handed him a ring, silver, simple. "It's not a wedding," she said. "It's a staying." He put it on without a word, and that night, under a sky dusted with stars, they sat on the porch, 2 mugs of cider between them. The wind was softer now, and in the hush he said, "They thought you were broken." She looked at him. He took her hand, but I saw gold in the ashes. The town gathered in spring, as it always did, for the Dust Bell Fair. It was the only day the church bells rang for joy instead of warning, when tables lined Main Street with pies and preserves, and children darted under ribbons tied between lampposts. Even the suspicious heart smiled once a year. She hadn't planned to go, too many memories, too many eyes. But he asked her gently, hand on hers. "Come with me." She hesitated. "What if they still don't see me?" "They don't need to," he said. "I do." So she dressed in sky blue cotton and tied her hair back in a white ribbon, the same color she used to fear, the color of veils and endings. Today it felt like beginning again. He wore his usual boots, hat, rolled sleeves, the look of a man who belonged to the land and nothing else. They arrived on foot, and silence fell, slow as dusk, not cruel, just watchful. She held her breath, expecting to be the shadow behind him, the ghost they tolerated. But he surprised her. He walked to the center of the street, where the preacher's podium stood unused, climbed onto it, dusted it off, then turned to face the crowd, and her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I never cared much for speeches," he said. "But there's someone I need to name, because she's been unnamed too long." The wind quieted. He looked at her, soft and steady. "This woman, the one you once passed by, pitied, doubted. She saved me. Not with words, not with promises, with presence." He stepped down and walked toward her, boots echoing against the planks. "She doesn't need this town's blessing, but I do." Then in front of all of them, he held out his hand. Not in demand, in devotion, in choice. She stood frozen, not from fear, from awe. Slowly, she stepped forward and placed her hand in his, and the crowd, that old slow-moving thing, clapped. It wasn't loud, it wasn't all of them, but it was enough. Clara nodded through tears. The blacksmith gave a slow, approving tilt of his chin. Even the preacher muttered, "Sometimes miracles wear dust and don't speak." They didn't marry in the church. They didn't need pews or stained glass. They chose the field behind the ranch. Wildflowers underfoot, stars overhead, and lanterns strung between fence posts. No orchestra, just the sound of wind in the grass, and a harmonica played by the old stable hand. She wore the same blue dress, he wore the same boots, and as they stood side by side, palms pressed together, the preacher said, "No vows can bind what was already chosen long before." They kissed with quiet reverence, not as an ending, as a beginning. Years passed gently, like wind through wheat. The ranch grew, a new foal in spring, a second barn built by hand, and laughter returning to the land. She taught a girl from town how to sign simple words with her hands. He carved a rocking chair with initials burned into the seat. One autumn, they planted a tree at the edge of their property, an oak where the fence once split during the storm. Beneath it, they buried the past, a letter never sent, a name never spoken, a ring from a life that no longer fit. And when the tree bloomed 5 years later, they brought their son to see it. His name? Elias. Named not for a family name, but for a man neither of them had met. A name they found in a book about hope, one left behind by her mother. They didn't need legacy. They built one of their own. One winter night, as snow fell softly and the fire warmed the room in amber glow, she looked at him. Truly looked. Lines had deepened at his eyes. Her hands were rougher now, her voice steadier, and still, he held her hand the same way he did that day in town, like it was the only thing that mattered. "I never asked you," she said, "why you stayed that first time." He smiled, thumb brushing her knuckle. "Because I saw a woman who didn't run from silence. She lived in it, and I wanted to learn how." They sat like that until the fire burned low, until the snow thickened against the windows, until the world felt still. She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.